God chose David to be the new king himself. This made the current king, Saul, very angry. Saul tried to kill David. When David had the chance to get the jump on Saul, he chose compassion rather than anger. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why? Hey guys, so if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why? Huh. Well, there's a lot of different things that would be really cool to be able to do. So it'd be really cool to be able to fly, have X-ray vision, maybe be the strongest person, maybe be, I don't know. I think probably I would choose to have the power to, hmm, maybe fly. I think it'd be pretty cool to be able to go from place to place and not have to get in a car, not have to walk if I don't want to. So to be able to fly, I think that would be probably pretty cool. Well, some of the best scenes in superhero movies are those that have face-to-face confrontations with our heroes. The confrontations, the conversations between the good guys and the bad guys. These are the moments when we're at the edge of our seat and we're watching intently. Maybe the music is swelling, and so that kind of gives us a clue that something's happening, and we know that something big is going to happen. It's the moment when Carol Danvers stares down the man that she thought was her friend, preparing to fight him for real. It's the time when Loki says, I have an army, and Iron Man says, we have a Hulk. Yeah, it's the moment when Thanos arrives and the heroes are ready, weapons in hand, ready to take him down. There's a lot of tension in those moments. And we know that a fight is about to happen. We've watched the bad guys wreak havoc for a while, or maybe far too long, and we've watched our heroes prepare for this moment. Thor has his hammer in grip. Iron Man's ready to take flight. Captain Marvel is waiting for his chance to strike back, to strike first. Everyone's angry and ready to fight. And the last thing that we expect, the last thing we want to see is our heroes putting their weapons down, sticking out their hand and saying, hey, buddy, can't we just shake hands and get along? That would not be a movie to want to see. Well, Avengers fight bad guys, and that's why we love them. That's why we like to watch those things. They defend the city, the world, even the galaxy from evil. But when it comes to the bad guys that we encounter in our life, God is calling us to be different. He wants us to be non-Avengers, not Avengers. He wants us to choose love over anger. Jesus shocked the world when he said, love your enemies. And it shocked the world even more when people realized he wasn't joking. He really means it. Jesus wants us to love people who are the hardest to love. Can you think of people like that? I can. Being a non-avenger means forgiving people rather than holding on to grudges. And loving our enemies means forgiving them. It also means that instead of striking back when they hurt us, we need to do our best to show them kindness. It's not easy. I know it's hard, but we can do it. Today, we're going to meet a non-avenger named David. David had probably one of the very most dangerous enemies ever. His enemy was Saul, the king of Israel, and he wanted David dead. Well, David was one of Saul's most loyal soldiers, but he was forced to run away for his life. One day, while David was in a cave, hidden away, something extraordinary happened. And that's the account we're going to look at in 1 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 19. The good guy and the bad guy of one of those classic confrontations. So 1 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 19. This is when Saul returned from following the Philistines. He was told, behold, David is in the wilderness in Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. He had to go potty. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave, and the men of David said, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you. And David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterward, David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put on my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with his words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave. He called after Saul, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your harm'? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancient says, out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. After whom was the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it, and plead my cause, and deliver me from your hand." As soon as David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for that you have done to me this day." So can you imagine the look on Saul's face when he walked out of that cave and he heard David's voice behind him? You ever walked out of someplace and somebody calls your name? It's scary, isn't it? You startle, you shake. Well, Saul knew in that moment that he was only alive by the kindness and forgiveness of David. He knew that he was the bad guy and David was undeniably good. He could have had his men attack David and probably have defeated him. Remember, he had like 3,000 people, or a ton of them, but he couldn't do it. David had shown him love that he did not deserve, and Saul left David in peace. David shows us that we can put down our weapons and show kindness even to a bully. He shows us that when we choose compassion over anger, we can change the hearts of the meanest and nastiest of enemies. No, it's not easy to love an enemy, but when we trust God and are willing to take a risk, sometimes we can turn enemies into friends. We can do more with an act of forgiveness than we ever could by striking back. Some people think that being kind to an enemy is a sign of weakness, but the truth is, it takes more strength to be kind to your enemy than it does to strike back. It takes courage and great strength not to punch someone back or to call someone a name in return for their name calling. It's what we want to do, but we have to be stronger. When we are hurt or offended, we want to avenge. We want to make them feel as bad as we do. Well, the last thing we want in the heat of the moment is to let that person feel like someone loves them. Even David struggled to forgive Saul at first. He had his weapon in hand and he cut off a piece of the king's robe. What? The king would never have even known that David was there unless David wanted him to know. But what would have happened if David had killed Saul? Do you think Saul's men would have shown forgiveness if David had been so unforgiving? No. Yeah. David probably would have died as well, and Israel would have then no king. David knew that there was only one way to defeat Saul. He put away his sword, he came out of hiding, and he told Saul he had spared his life. He put himself at the mercy of the man who had sworn to kill him. Saul was stunned. He didn't deserve David's forgiveness, and while he didn't welcome David back as a friend, he left him in peace. I know some of you face kids who are tough to deal with every day at school, maybe just on the bus, on the playground, maybe even in your neighborhood. I know many of you have tried striking back when you've been hurt. And I know the idea of loving that person must sound not only crazy, but foolish. hmm When you see that boy or girl later this week, maybe tomorrow, remember David. Remember that a non Avenger does not call names or strike back. God can show us how to love that person even if we never turn them into a real friend. It's okay. They don't have to be our friends, but He can help us make peace. If you learn to love difficult people as kids, then you're going to have a much easier time with those people later in life. You will never fear a bully because you know that the ultimate weapon against bullies is love. You can change hearts and even make friends with your enemies by showing them love. It's not easy, but we can do it. So Loki had an army, Iron Man had a Hulk. But we have something even better. We have a good and loving God who can teach us to love our enemies as David loved his. Let's ask God to help us love the difficult people this week that we know. And let's ask Him to help us love them so that we, like David, can show compassion instead of anger. Dear God, help us to love people who aren't so easy to love. Ephesians 4:32. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Let's make this week's lesson real. Is there a person that you are trying to be kind to today that is hard to love? Pray together as a family about that person and for opportunities to love them this week as God wants us to.